Professor, eu queria voltar um pouco ao passado na linha do que o professor Sábio está dizendo. Após a Guerra Fria, quer dizer, houve uma mudança na política externa americana no sentido de não mais temer um inimigo interno. E, por outro lado, criou-se, principalmente nos militares, e o Brasil foi usado como uma espécie de laboratório, na questão da segurança nacional, ou seja, a volta para dentro do país. O senhor teve acesso a documentos secretos no governo americano que contam um pouco desse nosso período aqui no Brasil. Como é que o senhor analisa esse período? Que informações o senhor tem sobre isso?
Oh, there's plenty of documents. The United States is quite an open society, and one of the good things about it is you have fairly good access to the record of secret planning, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, but sometimes even pretty recent. Incidentally, I do not think that U.S. foreign policy changed dramatically after the Cold War. If you look at, say, pick any issue, Middle East, Cuba, Panama, it's all the same. Nothing much changed. Some changes, but the policies were not guided by fear of the Soviet Union. That was a pretext, and you can see it very clearly by the fact that the policies continue, but with a different pretext. So in the case of Cuba, for 30 years, the pretext was danger of the Soviet Union. Right after the Cold War, what happens? The policies get harsher. But now they're, because all of a sudden the United States loves democracy, so next there'll be some other pretext. So I don't think the policies changed. With regard to Brazil, we know the record pretty well. In the late 1950s, the Eisenhower administration began to propose a strengthening of the Latin American military and a shift in their mission, which is largely determined in the United States. It proposed a shift which was finally, it couldn't be instituted at the time. Congress wouldn't accept it, but it was instituted under Kennedy. In 1962, the Kennedy administration shifted the mission of the Latin American military from hemispheric defense, which is kind of a holdover from World War II, to what they called internal security, which is just a technical term, which means war against their own populations. And the Brazilian military coup, in fact, shortly after, was one of the first examples of this. Very warmly welcomed in the United States, even publicly. You don't have to go to secret documents for that. Publicly welcomed by the Kennedy people. I mean, Kennedy had been killed by then, but by his Lincoln Gordon, Robert McNamara, the rest, greatest victory for freedom in the mid-20th century, and so on. Brazil's a big country and had a domino effect. It sort of spread through the hemisphere right into Central America in the 80s. An enormous plague of repression, unique in the history of this very bloody continent. And it devastated many popular organizations. It set the basis for the kinds of policies that are now being pursued. And yes, you can trace it right back to the shift in the mission of the military. The Brazilian military were called an island of sanity in Brazil, and their takeover was very warmly welcomed. Brazil became what the business press called the Latin American darling of the business community. Meanwhile, we know enough to mention what happened to the population, but a sector benefited. And so it remained until the late 1980s, very high growth rate, splitting into two completely separate countries. All of this warmly welcomed in international financial circles. And yes, you can trace it to, we don't have the records for recent years, but we have them from the early 60s. And they're pretty clear. The most important ones, I suppose, are from about 1966. They've been available for some years. These are discussions within among the Kennedy intellectuals. McNamara was Secretary of Defense, with George Bundy, the National Security Advisor. And they discussed the developments in Brazil. This is 2 years after the coup. It was a great success. They argue that within what they call the Latin American cultural context, it is necessary for the military to overthrow civilian governments when, in their judgment, the civilian governments are not acting in the interests of the nation. And the interests of the nation are then described very explicitly in terms that you would think come from a Maoist tract. referring quite openly to the revolutionary struggle for power among the conflicting classes in Central America and the need to improve the investment climate and so on. Very frank, this is internal discussion, and the military takeover had indeed contributed to that, so was warmly welcomed. Shortly after, you have the overt U.S. support for the overthrow of the Allende government, and then on through the atrocities in Central America and so on. Other respect, none of this had anything to do with the Russians. I mean, how many Russians were there in Brazil in 1964? In fact, the Russian influence actually the Russians were supporting the Argentine generals. They were one of their leading trading partners. Of course, everything was, for the American population, the U.S. population, the Russian threat was always waived. That's the way you control people, you frighten them. But in the United States, in reality, it's a joke. There's no Russian threat in the Western Hemisphere. The Russians were much more threatened in Western Europe than the United States was in the Western Hemisphere.
Pois é. Aqui no meu canal, queridos amigos, eu estou postando, e já desde 2016, acho que eu posto detalhes, documentos, provas, entrevistas, áudios. Eu acabei de postar agora áudios do John Kennedy com o embaixador no Brasil, no Rio de Janeiro, Lincoln Gordon, foi o grande conspirador do golpe de 64, com militares e a elite financeira brasileira e o governo americano. Foi ele que intercalou, foi um meio, e o governo americano, e áudios do Lyndon Johnson, que era vice do Kennedy e assumiu a presidência depois do assassinato de John Kennedy, né? Intensificando o golpe. Se inscreva aqui no meu canal porque há várias outras provas vindas dos próprios americanos a respeito disso tudo. Ditadura nunca mais. E vamos combater também os resquícios da ditadura hoje, né? A tortura, os milicianos assassinos, o extremismo, a apologia da tortura e da ditadura. Chomsky e vários outros registros que eu colocaria aqui comprovam que não havia ameaça comunista nenhuma e que a ditadura foi antipovo, foi imperialista, foi subserviente, foi capitalista contra o povo brasileiro. Não preciso citar aqui dados da economia, dados do aumento da pobreza, da concentração de renda, da corrupção e da roubalheira abafadas pela censura, ao jornalismo e ao Ministério Público, enfim, órgãos de investigação. Tudo isso é um material muito extenso, muito claro, que eu vou colocando aqui no meu canal, no meu blog e nas minhas redes sociais. Até a próxima. Esse papo não termina aqui.